Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh is Severe Weather, and we have started the year off with a bang. 14 severe thunderstorm and tornado watches already this year in just 4 days, and had some record high low temperatures set in Virginia and Maryland yesterday, just some crazy warmth. And then now our next storm battering California, the bomb cyclone that bombed out over the eastern Pacific, is now bringing torrential rainfall, thunderstorms, and heavy amounts of snow to the mountains of California. So it's already been an insane first 4 to 5 days of the year 2023. You're probably asking yourself, okay, so when is winter going to return? Well, I do have some more encouraging news about that for those of you in the eastern and southern United States, and I'm going to share that with you here starting next week. We do have at least some signal for potentially a winter storm later on in the week. What will happen is we will have colder air making its way southward as the week begins, and a more active storm track in the central U.S., which will eventually translate eastward to the East Coast. And of course, the big question mark will be, does the southern United States get to finally capitalize on this cold air? And the answer to that question is, I'm not 100% sure because it's still a week out, but I think the signal is there for something to potentially happen. So let's go ahead and talk about that. You'll see that my graphic shows that a storm system will cut south across the deep south, and with enough moisture in place, we could have some wintry precipitation in the mid-south and then heading eastward into the Carolinas and potentially heading up the East Coast. That part I think is the most uncertain. And again, we're talking late next week and especially next Saturday. So we're still about 8, 9, 10 days out from this potential storm. Still quite a bit of time in a meteorological world, but at the same time, I tell people, look, if there's enough of a signal and a potential for something to happen, I would rather know about it than find out later. So that's my take on things. So anyway, let's take a look at weatherbell.com, and I'm going to start with the Canadian upper air chart and show you guys where the storm will be originating from. This is a trough over western Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, still very far away from the eastern United States. If this is today, and as we track that off to the south and east, we'll see a piece of energy dive southward into the northeastern Pacific, and then we'll be approaching the Pacific Northwest early next week. A piece of that breaks off into the Great Basin of the Southwest here next Wednesday, and then as it moves eastward into the central and southern plains next Thursday, it actually intensifies some. We have a ridge that is increasing in strength over the western U.S. and a departing trough across the eastern United States. Typically speaking, this trough is going to be able to pull colder air down with it out ahead of this next storm, which will then favor at least a farther southern advance of cold air. And as we continue to move on into next Friday and Friday evening, this storm system not phasing with the storm that's leaving and going to the Atlantic Maritimes of Canada, and an intensifying ridge between this storm and the next storm means that we've got a much farther southern track than what we've seen in storms so far this season. We've either had the cold air or we've had the storm system, but we haven't had a combination of the two yet. And now we're looking at the 13th and 14th of January, so a little after this time next week, for a potential storm that can dig through and develop into an southeastern cyclone, which would potentially move up the coast or move into Atlantic Canada. That part, again, still very unclear. This is the surface map from the Canadian, and I'm starting with the Canadian. I'll show you the European. I'm not even going to show you the GFS because it's a world of its own. It continues to be that way once we get past 7 days, and there's no point in showing it to you because it's just going to keep changing and looking unlike the other models until we get more within a week of this storm. So you guys can see the bomb cyclone moving up the west coast right now, producing very heavy rain across California. We also have the storm that's produced severe weather, still bringing some snow to the Great Lakes region and some moderate to heavy snow and sleet to northern parts of New England and rain to southeast New England, places like Boston. That storm is very slowly going to move out. It'll take until Friday and may end as a period of some wet snow on the Maine seacoast and down to Boston with snow showers back in the Great Lakes. No real lake effect. We don't have a lot of cold air pouring in behind this storm. It'll be cooler in the southeast than it has been, but it still will be on the mild side for this time of the year. The weekend will feature a weak system cutting across the deep south. Not going to see a lot of severe weather out of this. We'll see maybe some rain and maybe a little bit of wintry precipitation in the central Appalachians. That big storm across the west moves farther up, and another storm system reinforces the heavy rain threat over the end of the weekend and beginning of next week across the west coast. So California gets battered today and tonight, and then the next wave hits hard on Monday morning. That will be eventually moving in and bringing heavy mountain snow, followed by a second storm on Tuesday. So California stands three big storms over the next 6 days, unfortunately. And then this storm that we're watching down south will try to phase with a northern branch system and could produce some heavy snow across the interior of the Northeast and Great Lakes Tuesday night into Wednesday. I do not think the big cities of the Northeast are going to get much snow, if anything, out of this storm, unfortunately, because that low track is actually across New England, not up the East Coast, and far enough away to pull the cold air down with it. But this storm system that moves through the middle of next week will generate some colder air, and the trough will intensify and go negatively tilted. And what that will do is allow cold air to spill down into the southeast, finally, after about a 2-week layoff from this cold weather. So we'll be getting colder around the middle of next week. And then our next storm system that I talked about, which is over western Alaska now, is going to take a week to finally form over the southern and central plains over Oklahoma. And you'll see some wintry weather across the central plains in Nebraska. And then because of this cold air that is drilling south and east of the Appalachians all the way into Florida next week, we will see a more southern track. And the question mark, of course, is going to be, do the cold air and the storm and the moisture from the storm phase into potentially a winter storm? And the answer to that question is, it's a little too soon to say, but there are signals that that could certainly happen. This is next Friday night, and you can see wintry precipitation over the southern Appalachians spreading into the Piedmont of South Carolina and North Carolina. And may not just be snow, we could be dealing with some ice, unfortunately, if this track is correct. That storm is slow to generate off of the southeast coast, and then the model stops abruptly here on day 10. But with this high pressure system over the northeast, it's quite possible it goes out to sea. If this high is centered farther north and east, it may come up the east coast next weekend. So again, way too soon to make that immediate call, but something I'm going to be watching for you. The European model at the end of next week is farther south than the Canadian. And you can see snow drills down into the Kansas City area, into parts of Tennessee by next Thursday night, and then into northern Georgia and even South Carolina Friday morning. This track is so far south, it actually avoids Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. It has most of that winter weather in places that are very much not used to seeing it, like Augusta, Georgia, and Charleston and Myrtle Beach. And again, I'm not going with one particular solution. I'm just showing this possibility. But you can see a different storm track here across the east on Wednesday. Rather than a big storm across the interior of the Northeast, we just have a maritime storm with snow across Maine, and that moves out into Newfoundland. But this storm system is likely to potentially move up the East Coast, but maybe far enough offshore to not produce much in the way of any kind of wintry weather. So that's what I'll be watching for you guys. Now, a look at the ensembles, because I think it's important to just look at all the models averaged out, shows this ridge rebuilding here next week with a disturbance moving through this weekend, but it's not going to be a big deal. Mild air continues to build up and over the top of it, but we do see a strengthening trough in eastern Canada on Wednesday, a building ridge across the Rocky Mountains here next Wednesday as well. And as a result, we've got a piece of energy that drops under that ridge and is allowed to pull some cold air down from the trough in the eastern United States. So Thursday into Friday, we see a very strong, for this time of the year, trough centered over Georgia and South Carolina on the ensembles from the European. And when we have a situation like this and the ridge building over northern and eastern Canada, then we definitely have something to watch for winter weather across the southeast Friday and Saturday. So you can see this trough is at its strongest off the Carolina coastline Saturday morning, and then it moves out, and rather than up the coast, it looks like it's heading out to sea. But I do have some solutions showing it trying to come up the coast as well. So I think that is certainly still a possibility. This is the surface map, and this is an average of where the low pressure centers are on the European ensembles. You can see it's moving down through Birmingham, Atlanta, and all the way down to the southeastern coast off of Savannah and Hilton Head next Friday morning, and then moving up to the Outer Banks. And there's still some solutions that bring that up towards Cape Cod. So I'm keeping an eye on that later next Saturday and Sunday. Other solutions heading out to sea. And of course, this is showing the average of those models of those ensemble members. The probability of seeing At least an inch of snow in 24 hours is fairly high across interior Northeast and New England from this departing storm. And then you can see the weaker system coming through at the end of the weekend and early next week could produce some snow across the central Appalachians, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. And then the next system drops south and east, and you can see a good chance for some snow over the St. Lawrence Valley, northern New England, and Great Lakes next Wednesday into Thursday. And then our next storm, Thursday into Friday, again, this is taking all the ensemble members, shows the better chance for snow is going to be across parts of the interior Northeast. But the storm track is all the way down here, so let's not forget about maybe some wintry weather all the way into the Raleigh and Charlotte areas and possibly even Columbia before this chance for some snow on the ground, maybe across New England on next Sunday. Temperatures are definitely getting colder. This is where we are now. We're starting to see that cooler air pushing all the way down into Florida this weekend, and it'll stay pretty chilly here, according to the ensembles. A little bit of warming coming next Tuesday here in the deep south, but notice these temperatures are much cooler than they were earlier this week. As we head into Thursday and Friday, we can see chilly air all the way down into Tennessee and the Carolinas, with daytime temperatures only going to be mainly in the 40s and low 50s in here, which is about average on Thursday. On Friday, it's even chillier. We look for temperatures to be in the 30s and low 40s as that chilly air spills south and eastward from eastern Canada all the way down into parts of the deep south. We may not get out of the 40s on the Gulf Coast on Friday afternoon. This isn't a model average, but certainly shows that cold. And Saturday remains very cold. So you're definitely going to be running the fireplace here in the southeast as we head into next weekend, the 14th into the 15th. The operational European is more extreme than the ensembles, as you might expect. As we carry on into the weekend here, it's definitely cooler, but moderating some on Saturday into the 50s and 60s. And then next week, we see the next wave of cold coming down on Monday. And it'll warm back up Tuesday into Wednesday, but here is the European model for next Thursday afternoon. Very warm on the Gulf Coast, but you can see a stark contrast where this boundary is going to set up on Thursday afternoon. And as we head one day further, temperatures take a big nosedive. Remember, I showed you 60s. Now we're looking at 40s and even some 30s in places like Georgia Friday afternoon, according to this one solution. Florida does not get cold from this storm on Friday, but it will turn colder on Saturday, maybe potentially a very big drop from the 70s into the 40s and 50s. But definitely cold air in place for a few days here, and that will line up with our next storm system before things moderate the week of the 16th. This is the European. We'll take a look at 2-day snowfall, mainly just over the weekend, parts of the Great Lakes and the Midwest seeing some snowfall, as well as the interior of the Northeast. Maybe enough snow to accumulate in the mountains here for a change Sunday and Sunday night, but that's going to be a quick moving storm that leaves the area. And then we look at our next storm dropping down on Thursday morning, and you guys can see the European shows the potential for accumulation down through the middle part of Tennessee, western Kentucky, all the way into the Carolinas next Friday, and all the way down into Georgia and South Carolina Friday afternoon and evening, which is the farthest south I've seen an operational model. The Canadian model does show some snow as well. These are the ensembles, but you can see the chances for accumulating snow rather than down in here are going to be near and to the north of I-85 on Friday night into Saturday, but still that potential for some accumulating snow across this area. So the Canadian shows it here, the European shows it here. The GFS does not have it anywhere close, but that doesn't mean the GFS is going to nail it. We've seen the GFS do some crazy, stupid stuff lately. So anyway, I appreciate y'all's time, and I appreciate you visiting my channel. If you could like and subscribe, I would appreciate that. And I will say, of course, if you guys need any kind of encouragement, because it's already been a challenging start to 2023 with the weather, I'm here to pray for you guys. I'm happy to, even if it's an unspoken prayer request, happy to pray with you. If you're not a believer, all I can say is, look, I wasn't either for 30 years, but I decided that it was time to look at what's been promised to me in heaven, and that's to turn to God through his son, Jesus Christ. And in James 1:12, the scripture states, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And I just didn't want to go through life not loving God anymore. A window opened for me, a door opened for me in 2013, and I decided to turn to the Lord, despite many, many tests that I was going through, both medical and in my career and just in life, and losing family members that I love dearly in that 1 year period. So I'm thankful that I've been given this gift from God of eternal life through His Son Jesus Christ. And if that's what you believe as well, then I'm happy to pray for you. If that's not what you believe, I will still pray for you, because I think it's just as important. But the reason I'm on YouTube, the reason I've got this community, is to serve God through the weather forecasting abilities that I have as a degree meteorologist, but it's also to serve God and to serve others as well. So I really appreciate y'all's time. I thank you so much for stopping by to watch my video. I'll have more for you coming up on this upcoming potential wintry threat over the next several days. And God bless you, and have a wonderful Thursday.